welcome everyone. This is Biosafety Now's 10th Twitter Space. My name is Bryce Nichols. I'm one of the co-founders of Biosafety Now and a professor of genetics at Rutgers University, lab director at the Waxman Institute of Microbiology. Biosafety Now is a nonprofit organization we launched in February of this year. We're a US-based nonprofit led by experts in biomedicine, mathematics, public health, public policy, law, social science, and public advocacy. We're working for a future where scientific research on pathogens supports human life without threatening it, and public trust in science is restored. To learn more about us, you can visit our website, biosafetynow.org, and if you do, please sign up to our newsletter. I'm joined tonight by another member of Biosafety Now's leadership team, Dana Parrish. Dana is an author, health reporter, songwriter, member of the advisory board of the Bay Area Lyme Foundation. Her book, Chronic, which was co-written by another member of Biosafety Now's leadership team, Dr. Stephen Phillips, came out in August of 2020 and called attention to the underlying infectious causes of autoimmune, psychiatric, and neurological illnesses ranging from Lyme disease to COVID. Dana, you want to say hello real quick? It's been a while since.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thank you.
Right.
Great to talk to you. And hi, Sam. Sam is one of my favorites. I'm so excited.
That's right. So Dana and I were honored to welcome as our special guest tonight, Husseini, who goes by Sam. He's an independent journalist who's scrutinized the establishment's falsifications for 25 years. So over that time, he's been regularly asking tough questions at State Department briefings. Well before the 2003 invasion of Iraq by the U.S., he exposed a pattern of deceit by Bush, Cheney, and other U.S. officials about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction program. In 2018, notably, he made a lot of news when he was forcibly removed from the Trump-Putin summit in Helsinki because he wanted to ask about the nuclear weapons ban treaty, which 122 countries had voted in favor of, but the U.S. and Russia, who obviously are major nuclear weapons stakeholders, blocked. In early 2020, and this is what we're going to be talking about a lot today, before COVID was declared a pandemic, he wrote a series of in-depth pieces scrutinizing official claims that SARS-CoV-2 did not have a research-related origin. And as some of you are aware, in October 2022, he co-authored an in-depth investigation titled "Did West Africa's Ebola Outbreak of 2014 Have a Lab Origin?" along with virologist Jonathan Latham. He continues to write about pandemic origins, weapons of mass destruction, big tech, and other issues. And I know he's been following RFK Jr.'s presidential campaign, I think, recently. Over on you can read all about his pieces on his Substack site, which is husseini.substack.com. And so, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Sam to our Twitter space tonight. And I guess this is his first ever Twitter space. So welcome, Sam.
Great to be with you, Bryce, Dana. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, well, we're really looking forward to this. And I guess full disclosure, I guess I've spoken with you a bunch over the last week or so. This morning, actually, we went over several of the things that I want to get to tonight. So I'm excited to, share our conversations that we had earlier with a live crowd. So I wanted to start, if you could go kind of give us a little bit of a background on your career arc, kind of what, because you have had a very fascinating career. I guess I noted this morning to you, and I posted on my Twitter page this clip of you on the O'Reilly factor, which I found remarkable, which I'll bring up later. But can you just go into a little bit about your background, sort of what got you to where you are today?
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know where to. My educational background is applied math, computer science, and logic and computation at Carnegie Mellon. I'm originally Palestinian Jordanian, came to the U.S. when I was 5. After working for a year on Wall Street doing stuff for Moody's and such, I've figured I didn't want to do that with my mathematical ability. And I started volunteering at the Media Watch Group Fair, and then just got more and more into journalism, and started doing freelance work, and ended up being being with a group called the Institute for Public Accuracy, which is a really interesting perch because it lets me talk with experts on different issues. But I really focused in the 1990s on the Gulf War and then the sanctions on Iraq, claims that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and I was kind of a leading person pointing out the pattern of deceit, starting with the Clinton administration, really, but then accelerating dramatically, of course, under Bush Cheney, culminating with the invasion, and then I did all kinds of journalistic stuff in DC where I could, trying to practice a real fact-based, sometimes radical form of journalism, asking tough questions at the National Press Club, most recently at the State Department, focusing on foreign policy, but getting into other issues as well. It's I think that my work has, led me to this because of just some core beliefs of, stated goals are not actual goals by the establishment. They can say that they're doing X, for this benevolent goal, but that's rarely the case. And I think that that's true in this realm as well, in terms of doing dangerous lab work. So I scrutinize, militarism and such, and it's been, a strange 3 years, in that most of my, political and journalistic allies are incapable or not wanting to see what's quite evident to me about what's gone on regarding COVID origins. But that's the nature of our sort of weird, political mirrored funhouse in the United States right now.
So, with regard to your past work in the space where you were looking at, misinformation around the invasion of Iraq, and prior to that, I guess you said with the Clinton administration, one thing that is fascinating to me, of course, are some of the clips that you posted on your website, which shows the interactions you had. I mean, there's a notable clip of you questioning Dan Rather about whether he believed the U.S. committed war crimes when they was that bombing of Kosovo. Is that what that was, that clip, right? Sorry, yeah,
Yugoslavia, yeah.
Yugoslavia. I'm sorry. So, and then their other one I found fascinating because there's all these just connections that keep coming back up. Is you ask a question of Biden in 2007, and then as you walk away, Tony Blinken engages with
Yep.
you, which is again like these characters showing up again today. And I guess one of the themes, I think what'll happen as we go along here is we'll keep sort of bouncing back and forth in the history of all this because, obviously the invasion of Iraq and then the Amerithrax attacks led to, we've gone over this before, but of course we can revisit it here, led to the proliferation of a large sort of biodefense industrial complex in the U.S. And so I guess
Exactly.
I guess, do you want to touch on that a little bit? You're probably
Sure.
actually more familiar with it, or at least a different perspective than I have about it. So if you want to talk about that a little bit.
Sure. But by the way, the Dan Rather clip, just a funny story about that. My question to Rather was, could you interview Walter Rockler, who was, one of the last remaining members of the Nuremberg prosecution team? And, Dan Rather was like, oh, he would have no problem getting on the CBS Evening News. And I mean, I was talking to Rockler at the time. And then when I shared the clip with him, he just laughed. He was like, these guys will never put me on. So it was
Yeah,
funny.
just to clarify there, so you were questioning, I guess I should fill in, the question you posed to him was whether it's a war crime for a nation to cut off electricity and water to a
Right.
nation that they're
Right.
attacking, and so that it would impact civilians. That was the basis of your question, and he I guess he kind of agreed to disagree with you about whether that would qualify as a war crime, just to fill that in. But
Right. But it ended with, could you invite this guy on to have that? And he was like, yeah, sure, we'd have him on any time, or some words to that effect.
right.
And the guy himself says they're not inviting me on. Anyway, um, so ultimately with I mean, you're quite right to point to the anthrax attacks in 2001. That definitely was the first time that I, really, well, I guess with Iraq as well, but that stepped up my interest in bioweapons and biodefense. Um, I mean, people might recall what happened was shortly after the 9/11 attacks. Um, Letters were sent in the mail throughout the United States, in particular to members of the media and Congress, with "Death to America, death to Israel, praise to Allah," scrolled on them, obviously designed to make everyone think that they were coming from Al Qaeda and or Iraq, um, and that had the desired effect. And there were calls throughout the media for retribution, and it really put the whole country. It's really difficult to overstate the effects of the 9/11, the anthrax attacks. I mean, 9/11 was, catastrophic event, but it was a discrete event, whereas the anthrax letters literally threatened anyone who was, opening their mail. Um, and mail back then was, actually important. And so, Congress shut down at a certain point. The senators targeted were Leahy and Daschle, who were the ones who seemed most, poised to scrutinize the Patriot Act, which Bush Cheney were trying to ram through Congress at the time. This was also when they were building up for the first of several wars, the invasion of Afghanistan, and it really helped solidify this sense of fear throughout the country, and blaming, Iraq, Al Qaeda, Arabs, Muslims, for this threat. Um, it ended up that it came from a U.S. or U.S. allied lab. The FBI tried to pin it on several individuals, eventually pinning it on Bruce Ivins, who um, died of an apparent suicide. So there was never a trial. Mueller, who was then head of the FBI in 2008, finally came before the Senate, and Leahy told him directly to his face that he didn't buy that Bruce Ivins could have done it all, which is what the FBI was claiming. So, in addition, so and the anthrax attacks spurred on the U.S. the U.S. government massive spending on so-called biodefense. It was, a huge spike at that point, and there are personnel ties and other ties between the anthrax attacks and present-day COVID. Um, Judy Miller was intimately tied with the anthrax attacks. She was part of a war game that was done before then. New York Times reporter, major conduit for disinformation about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, had just published a book called Germs. She got a white powder that appeared to be anthrax but wasn't, dramatically accelerating her fame and notoriety at that critical time. And her main, one of her main sources was David France, who came out of Fort Detrick, the main U.S. bioweapons facility in Maryland. And he is now, among other things, a major advisor to EcoHealth Alliance, which, of course, was the conduit for the funding of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, among other things. So there are numerous nexuses between the anthrax attacks and present day COVID, and other aspects of bioweapons work. For example, Judy Miller in 2003, after the invasion of Iraq, they were still trying to claim that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. So they came out with the story that Iraq had these mobile weapons labs. And so the Times published a piece by Judy Miller, quoting David Franz again, putting out this theory, which would effectively justify the invasion of Iraq. That was debunked by an eminent scientist in Britain named David Kelly in the BBC. David Kelly would then die of an alleged suicide, and the BBC would be dramatically restructured to better reflect the views of the British government at that point. So that there are several nexuses between these individuals that sort of highlight the potential threats around deceits around bioweapons work.
Right. Now, I guess with David Franz, and we'll talk about him, I think, in present day times a little bit more, but one of the things, this is the notable quote. I actually sent it to somebody earlier today. So David Franz, when asked about whether, I guess he was commenting on whether the anthrax attacks were sort of bad, was like a horrible thing. And he said, I think a lot of good has come from it. From a biological or medical standpoint, we've now 5 people who have died, but we've put about $6 billion in our budget into defending against bioterrorism.
That's
That
great.
quote
I didn't know
is the
that.
most, like, that is such a disturbing statement from any human. Not only one that's involved in like very important decisions these days, right? So that is the type of statement that just scares the living, heck out of me. That these are the people in power and have been in power for decades, and kind of sort of fuels the fire for what we're trying to do. So yeah, David Franz. I guess his name will come up again, as well as we spoke about like Cadlick as well. So maybe let's see. So this it's actually like the fact you mentioned the white powder, the sort of false flag. I guess you're implying with Judy Miller getting fake white powder. Not that well, possibly. But
Yeah,
do you remember early on in the pandemic, Peter Daszak received or claimed to receive an envelope of white powder too? Do you remember that?
I remember hearing about that, but I never looked
Yeah,
into
it's
it.
just kind of a funny
I
little
probably should.
anecdote. I just am recalling now that we're talking about it. But yeah, it was reported in the news and then it sort of went away. But regardless, so I guess if we fast forward, we'll come back to the 2000s, I know, but if we fast forward now to the pandemic, the start of the pandemic, um, I guess it sounded like you first heard, how did you first hear of the idea that it might be a research-related incident instead of a natural order?
In late January, I got an email from Francis Boyle, who's a professor of law at the University of Illinois and wrote the U.S. implementing legislation to the Bioweapons Convention. I think around the 25th of January, he wrote me an
It might have been
email.
the 17th of January, I think, maybe.
Okay,
Sorry. No.
all right, maybe it is. I'm sorry.
No, I was
I
reading.
know I wrote this
No,
up,
his
and I haven't
his
looked.
name came up a bunch of times. I'm fascinated by his connection to all this too. That's why I was, yeah.
Right. Well, at any time, well before the pandemic was declared a pandemic,
Yeah.
he has a little bio warfare list of, I don't know, 25 people, and I'm on it. And COVID is spreading, and he just sends out an email saying somebody should check to see if there's a BSL-4 lab in Wuhan. And I was so tied up with the election, and it was right around the time of the Iowa caucuses or New Hampshire primary that I didn't check. And then a couple of days later, I got an email from him, there was a news article that acknowledged that there was a BSL-4 lab as if it was a good thing. It was like, thank goodness there's a BSL-4 lab in Wuhan that can help, address this outbreak kind of story. And so, he immediately put out a statement declaring that therefore one could conclude that this was the source of the pandemic, and he started giving interviews to that effect. This might have been by very late January, maybe very early February. Um, uh, I think shortly thereafter, it might have been at the same time, Tom Cotton started, you know, pointing to the Chinese and being nefarious and sort of framing it in a different way, but still talking about that. I really did a deep dive. The first person to point out that there was at least English language that I could find to point out was actually in late December. Chinese, who I assume is a Chinese American from the Council on Foreign Relations, put out a tweet noting that there was a BSL-4 lab in China that could conceivably be the source.
So Francis Boyle. The reason I found that person in particular very fascinating is because the clip that I posted earlier today of you going on Bill O'Reilly's Fox show,
yes,
the O'Reilly Factor.
right.
When you to give a little bit of context here. So you were on the O'Reilly Factor. I guess it wasn't your first time, but you'd been on several times before, and that was
No, and he had been almost cordial to me up until this point.
so. I guess for those of you that aren't familiar with the O'Reilly Factor, which there might be a bunch, so the O'Reilly Factor used to be like the go-to show on Fox News. It was like the number one show. It was the equivalent of like Tucker Carlson before he left, obviously. And Bill O'Reilly was like the key conservative guy, on cable news. And so 2 days after the 9/11 attack,
And right, and this is before Twitter and Facebook, so this is like the town square. It's hard to it's major. Yeah.
so you go on there along with the other guest is in fact Francis Boyle as the two people that he brings on to yell at because you're saying whoa, we shouldn't rush to invade and kill people. We have to, we shouldn't necessarily return, what did you like? You called it, I'm forgetting the term you used exactly, but like you should, what's that?
Yeah, I think I used the term cycle of violence, but
Right.
I pointed to, that the U.S. has been violent in the Middle East, and now it's, it's a putting out fire with gasoline pattern kind of thing that he was getting at.
And he told
I
you
was,
to calm down. You shouldn't get emotional. That what should happen is the U.S. should just indiscriminately kill people. Literally, that's what he said. And then you piped up again, and he cut your mic off. Now,
yep.
then I don't know what Francis Boyle said later on that program, but now fast forward to today, and I saw this. This again was off of your website. I saw that Francis Boyle, and I don't know if this is just a new way that he sort of thinks about things now. He actually, and you have a quote that says he proposed that we should shut down all BSL-4 and BSL-3s in the world and that apply the original draft verification protocol for the Biological Weapons Convention to deal with work at BSL-2 and BSL-1s. Is that so? He actually has gotten to the point where he thinks that there should be no more work at those high level biological containment facilities. Is that true, or am I?
I think that's his position. That there shouldn't be any such work. I'm not sure if I totally agree with it theoretically, but as a quasi practical matter, I mean, given our current political and economic systems, I can see the logic behind it. I mean, theoretically, I can understand that there might be benefit to such work, but it's difficult to trust this system with that kind of capability.
Well, I think so. There is a distinction, though, between work.
That might not be his reasoning.
Right.
But that's certainly what comes to mind for me.
So we had a very controversial thing happen with our Twitter account about a month and a half ago, when I posted a clip of a community activist saying that only bioweapons research is done at BSL 3s and 4s, and everyone got outraged that that was a complete lie and how horrible it was to misrepresent. And so it turned out, though, according to Richard, Richard said that maybe 20 to 40% of research at BSL 3s could be categorized as gain of function research of concern, and up to 80% at BSL 4s. So it's not obviously all research, but a significant portion of it. I do think that there are, of course, incredibly important experiments that need to be done certainly at BSL 3 and likely at BSL 4. But the issue really for me personally, and I think maybe others in the group, although I don't want to speak for them, is that there are just too many facilities. There's just too many chances for there to be an issue. How much is too much? And that's really what happened in 2001, where we went from having, this type of research was confined to military bases, I believe. And then after that, there was this pivot to doing it in academic institutions, which is just crazy.
Right.
So,
well, I mean, Richard Ebright, I think, has a BSL 3 at Rutgers there, and I'm going to hope and guess that his proportion of gain of function research of concern
so that's the issue, right?
is lower than the average.
No, he doesn't. Yeah, so his work would not qualify. The stuff that he does is BSL 3, I believe, is lit. Well, I think it just involves working with TB, but I'm not certain about that. But he is not doing anything that would fit under that category, as far as I'm aware. But certainly, even in 2014, he had advocated for getting rid of, I think, like reducing the numbers of labs by like a 20th, 5%, leave 5% of them because of the dangers of having too many. But it does, I guess, go to, this then raises this question, and maybe Dana, if you want to come in on this one, because this gets to this idea of gain of function. Because when we're talking about BSL 3 and BSL 4, and what types of experiments are dangerous to the public versus dangerous to the lab workers, and you've written about this as well, this term gain of function. Can you explain to me what your perception of that term is, and like what's happened to that historically, or whatever? I guess this is like a loaded question, I know.
Is that to me
well,
or to
it's
Dana?
To you. I was going to say Dana probably would. Dana has thoughts about this too. That's what I was saying. Like, if we're going to talk about gain of function a little bit here, I'm sure Dana has some questions about that.
Well, I mean, the main thing to me is that it's an incredible Orwellianism. It sounds like a good thing, gain of function. You want function. It's just that it's the capabilities of a pathogen to either make it either more transmissible or more deadly. So I think that it's an incredibly troubling term. I sometimes try to use the term potential pandemic pathogen, which I know that people like Mark Lipsitch and others in the academic literature refer to it as. Although, I can do my Mark Lipsitch critique as well if you like. And Francis Boyle would just say, look, it's biowarfare. You're just creating an elaborate ruse to disguise the fact what your actual goals are. You're pretending that it's for so-called defensive purposes, even though that's not in the treaty. The Bioweapons Convention Treaty doesn't make an exception for defensive purposes, it says that it must be for peaceful purposes. But if you talk to U.S. officials, they'll say it's being done for defensive purposes. We got to get ahead of what Mother Nature or the terrorists might throw at us, and therefore we need to do this work. Richard E. Bright has been adamant that there's no beneficial work that has resulted from this, but there have been terrible threats that have been created, obviously, at the University of Wisconsin and in the Netherlands with a more easily transmissible version of the avian flu, which is highly deadly, and which led to some public concern around 2011. But then the concern dropped off. That to me is sort of the core of the problem, or one core of the problem. Is it okay if I just break down where I came into the whole COVID thing and so on?
I will say, I guess you're just in terms of so you're specifically talking about gain of function when you're dealing with pathogens, because there's the problem. What's been done is the word has been used. So the gain of function applies to, you can do gain of function experiments in very benign organisms that aren't disease-causing organisms, and that's done all the time. Like all molecular biology involves some form of gain of function when you're working with organisms. So they take that advantage of that to gain the support of other scientists by saying, oh, they're going to prevent you from doing your experiments in your model organism if we ban gain of function, which is complete nonsense. But yeah, please, if you can talk about the...
So I guess, that's why gain of function research of concern, to delineate that, I presume is,
right.
Why. Yeah. So, I came into this, after I got the note from Boyle. There was a news conference at the press club with the CDC, and I chimed up, well into the news conference, and asked if it was a complete coincidence that it was that there was a BSL-4 lab in Wuhan. And the CDC spokesperson gave what I thought was a really disingenuous response. And so I started digging into things. And then we saw the Lancet letter come out, which was clearly, Daszak and his circles. And then we saw the Nature Medicine article come out. So I knew that it would be a very difficult problem to determine whether or not, COVID came out of a lab, because by its very nature, these types of pathogens, it's tough to pin down. And that ironically is part of the advantage of biowarfare. But one of the myths that we deal with is that biowarfare is a poor man's weapon. And so why are great powers like China and the United States involved in this? Well, bioweapons have one fairly unique benefit, and that is deniability. Nice country you got there. It would be a real shame if you had a whatever outbreak. And so you have a history of, Cuba, for example, charging that the U.S. has done biowarfare against it, and they can't prove it, or it's very difficult to prove for that reason. So I knew it would be difficult to show that, but what I did know was that people were lying. In particular, that the Lancet letter was false in dismissing the possibility of COVID of lab origins, and that the Nature Medicine article was disingenuous when claiming that it could not have been a laboratory construct. So I started digging in, and I wrote a lengthy piece about Daszak that came out in 2020, and I think helped, sort of lead to, the end of his dominance of the narrative. And I attempted to warn Jeffrey Sachs about Daszak after he named him to head the committee on the Lancet Commission, and I guess Sachs ignored my notes and didn't get rid of Daszak until I think June of 2021, eating up the better part of a year in terms of getting to the bottom of this. And I find Sachs's statements, while at times useful, to be highly problematic. Sachs is a very sophisticated guy. He must have known going in that Daszak had massive conflicts of interest. So I think that that's a problematic strain that we continue with here. And then the other thing was the Nature Medicine article. So I started digging into Gary and Anderson, the primary authors of the Nature Medicine piece. And I don't know if it was Meryl Nass or somebody else who pointed out to me that they were the ones who ran the Viral Hemorrhagic Fever Consortium, which is in West Africa, and which had been accused by Africans and others of potentially being the source of the 2014 Ebola outbreak. So I started digging into that, and we can go through the specifics of it if you like. But I found a good deal of evidence for that, and I found it to be a very remarkably similar case to COVID. The past outbreaks of Ebola were 1,000 miles away. There was a lab right there in the area. It was an anomalous outbreak. Past outbreaks of Ebola were accompanied by a die-off of the local mammalian species. That didn't happen in this case. There was a story of a child who allegedly played with bats, which was just over the border in Guinea, and part of a seeming pattern of attempting to frame Guinea so that people wouldn't say that the outbreak began in Sierra Leone, where the U.S. labs were. And it tied into various other aspects of the quote-unquote gain-of-function story. For example, Ron Klain was named Ebola czar, and on the same day that he was named Ebola czar was when the U.S. instituted its pause for funding of gain-of-function lab work. That can certainly be a coincidence, but it's a remarkable coincidence. And there were a whole series of other strains, and then Jonathan Latham, who's a virologist, added a great deal to the story. We built on some of the work done by Cherno Ba, who wrote a book about the outbreak, who's a journalist from Sierra Leone, who happens to just, by crazy coincidence, to be in the U.S. So I was able to communicate quite readily with him. So there's a very substantial case to be made there. I know I've heard people say, one outbreak at a time. I think the problem with that is that we have to figure out what it is we're dealing with here. And I don't know that we're dealing with the problem of an outbreak. I mean, COVID is, one of the most massive stories in human history. But what this indicates is that it's part of a larger structure. That is, it isn't a one-off, that there's a broader apparatus that is enabling this dangerous lab work, that it could all be part of a cover story for continued bioweapons work. And so I think that we need to approach these questions very methodically. And I think it's disconcerting if people, brush aside such possibilities, given the stakes involved, given the money involved, given the potential and agendas involved. So I sort of approached COVID differently from most people. I went back in time rather than, going through the blow by blow of, evidence as it came out. I mean, I tried to keep up with that, but the thrust of my work was to sort of make connections going back in time.
I think so, Sam. Yeah, I think you're talking about me when I was saying that was one.
I was being
Not
polite.
people, it's me. I've said it on here. I know Gregor's on here somewhere. He knows. Yeah, I guess my take on the whole. So, I obviously have said that it's something that should be considered. I don't know. I mean, I have read the article that you guys wrote, and it's obviously like packed full of stuff. I do think that that initial story of the kid playing in the tree is just ridiculous. Like that's such a ridiculous story that anybody would. Um, but I guess, well, my whole point is exactly what you said about this, which is as soon as you have the behavior that's occurred with relation to the COVID pandemic, and you see all of the obfuscation and the failure to provide information and the conflicts of interest, I put, the way I put it is you reap what you sow. Every single thing you've done in the past is going to come under scrutiny, and it's no surprise that if you look back and you see what people that have been apparently behaving in a way that looks like they're trying to obscure the investigations of COVID, you're going to look with suspicion on stuff they did before. I am personally very hesitant to get into a discussion of the Ebola outbreak in 2014-15, simply one, because of my ignorance on the subject, and two, as I've said before, with respect to the organizational structure of Biosafety Now, we've got, as I said, anything when we say, like, when we fail to put like an Oxford comma in some statement, we get accused of doing some causing tremendous threats to people. The point is that we have to be very careful. I know. I'm saying, like, I agree with you that it needs to be looked into. I guess I've only said that we can handle one at a time because that's my as trying to, like, fend off criticism from people about what our agenda is here. Whatever. I mean, simply our agenda is to. I mean, really, our key agenda right now is to stop, gain of function research of concern and EPPP research. Like, that just needs to end. The accountability piece, that's really difficult. But I think with what's going on with COVID, it's almost, and that actually is another thing. I know, Dana, you had something you wanted to say. I don't want to on this subject.
No, I just think it's interesting this pattern of intense denial around all of these potential research related incidents, if you want to call them, or accidents. I think that was, to me, what got my attention early on with COVID, and looking a little bit into the Ebola outbreak, that as well, and listening to some interviews with Sam. I think it's all just very curious to watch the reaction of a certain group of people and scientists and journalists,
right,
around these issues. I guess that's the thing that I find so troubling, is there seems to be a lack of open-mindedness about and a lack of will to address the incredible existential threat that it feels that we are under here.
Right, absolutely. And I mean, people, people in these positions of power might feel that everything that they've done is now going to be scrutinized, but I would argue not scrutinized enough, and scrutinized with good reason and overdue. I mean, you had the same sort of stuff in 2014. The depictions were these crazy Africans,
right?
Saying that with their conspiracy theories that it came out of a lab. So there, it's sort of like, that trope has been expanded to apply to a lot more people. So that doesn't prove guilt, but and there are institutional ties as well. For example, Metabiota seems to have played a serious role in obscuring the 2014 outbreak, and they're still highly involved in a lot of contemporary issues. I'm sorry, Dana.
And nobody really talks about that, and that is a really big issue and concern, and it's another one of these things that nobody wants to really get into. Um, did you watch the pandemic unfold and just think there's just so much propaganda here? Like, how do you even ever find the truth about any of it? Do you feel overwhelmed by that aspect of things?
I totally feel overwhelmed at times. One of the things that I did at the beginning of the pandemic was read, or more properly, listen to um, Nicholson Baker's book, Baseless, where he tried to determine if the U.S. used biowarfare against Korea. Um, and he ended up rewriting the book, and it ended up being a lament about the Freedom of Information Act not being able to provide answers. So all these decades later, he's still puzzling over at least the extent to which the U.S. used bioweapons in the Korean War. But that just highlighted to me that as much work as possible done in the moment could pay off massively over time. You know, I want if we can if we can move the needle even 5%, and I'm trying to move it 100%, but if we can move the needle 5% now, that over time, people aren't going to be puzzling over what happened 60 or 70 years from now. So that's part of what's motivated me here. But I think that there are massive layers of obfuscation from the so-called scientific establishment, from the media, from the political establishment that is dominated by Democrats who are like ostriches pretending that there isn't a problem here, and Republicans who just simply seek to demonize China with it. Um, there are so many layers of problems here
Yeah.
that it and propaganda that it can certainly become overwhelming. And I mean, it was particularly troublesome for me because, my own institution, my institutional affiliations and personal affiliations were not reliable in addressing these issues.
Yeah.
The traditional left has failed to perceive this correctly as a peace and justice issue, where if this has bioweapons applications, then all of the mainstream peace organizations should have this as a major issue. And with the exception of World Beyond War and David Swanson, that hasn't been in the effect. And it's so important that you guys are doing what you're doing, because there were so many other organizations that should have stepped up but were out of business, right? The Council for Responsible Genetics had folded.
Mm-hmm.
And the Sunlight Foundation, I know Ed Hammond is with you folks now,
Mm-hmm.
had folded. So there was nobody to give pushback at the beginning of the pandemic. And honestly, there were people who should have given. I mean, Richard. Thank God for Richard E. Bright and Francis Boyle. They argue, and Meryl Nass. I mean, they argue, but they were among the few people who were willing to speak up at a critical time. Mark Lipsitch wouldn't say a word. Now he's got tenure at Harvard.
Yeah.
What does he
Yeah.
need to goddamn say something? Allison Young. I mean, I know she just came out with a book, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
Mm-hmm.
But she had done all of this work on lab leaks and so on, and she wouldn't say a word in early 2020. The the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist wouldn't say a word in early 2020.
Why is that? Why do you think? Oh, this is an earnest question. I don't know the
Yeah.
answer. Why do you think that is? I think it's so bizarre. I mean, whenever I will tell you this, we wrote our book, and it actually was delayed. It was supposed to come in on 2020, but because of the pandemic, it did get delayed for a while until 2021. And so we were able to include a chapter on COVID, and we put in a line about the questions around the origins. And this was early on because we had written it. We had written that chapter by the end of 2020, and we got a lot of pushback just to put in a couple of lines about it in our book. And it was far from settled, but the narrative at the time was that if you bring up anything other than this came from a bat or a pangolin or the animal of the day, you were a conspiracy theorist, and that you were a fraud and a quack and all these things. And then the goalpost moved. Well, now you can say maybe it was a lab leak, but you can't say that maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was intentional. The goalposts just keep moving.
Right.
So I'm not sure what these people even could have done, but I'm curious, what do you think about why they didn't come forward with their feelings and thoughts around this issue?
I mean, you raised several critical questions, and I want to hit on all of them. So, feel free to push again. But I mean, I suppose cowardice. I mean, when Nicholson Baker wrote a piece in New York Magazine that came out in early 2021, he quoted Jonathan King at MIT, eminent scientist, who had been involved with Council for Responsible Genetics, and I'd been in, he he seemed to have been encouraging it for me in my work, but he wasn't speaking publicly at all. But he did give a quote to Nicholson Baker, and he said something about people are concerned about their funding. Now
Yeah.
I don't know, but I assume that a lot of scientists are thus concerned.
Well, there were some really hefty grants given in the face of COVID after the denial of potential lab origins. I think that's pretty hard to dismiss, right?
Yeah, I think that that's certainly a factor. Although, again, we're partially talking about Anderson and Gary here, and I hypothesize that their stance on COVID is related to their potential culpability on Ebola 2014. Those, the emails that we know with them and Jeremy Farrar and Fauci are very late January 2020. I really want to know what they were talking about in early January and even earlier.
Yeah.
So I think that even the FOIAs that we've gotten, thanks to U.S. Right to Know and others, I think are still limited in scope. And all of these journals, put little notices, like the Nature Medicine article from 2015 with Ralph Barrick and the folks at the WIV. They put little notices on all of them saying, people are saying that this implies lab leak, and scientists have determined that that that's not credible, something to that effect. So there were all of these roadblocks put in place, and big tech. I mean, I bear some culpability myself, because it was totally apparent to me that if I started tweeting about this, my account would be suspended.
Yeah. We were constantly being shadow banned and flagged for during the book, during the press tour, about any time, like we put an article, a ProPublica article, about how many times coronavirus or virus mishaps had happened in Ralph Barrick's lab. And we got a flag on our account about it, and it wasn't even our we didn't write it, we just posted it, and it was like, this is taken out of context, this may not be true, there's argument about this, and it was like, whoa, what is happening? This is really creepy.
Yeah, totally. To one of your other points was in terms of possible intentional release. Again, I dreadfully avoid saying lab leak. I say lab origin. I know that you folks sometimes say research related.
Yeah, research related incidents.
Right.
Yeah. Or research related spillover or something. Yeah, it sort of covers like going out into the caves too,
Yeah, and it should. But I mean, spillover kind of implies an accident as well. I'm not putting forward that I think that it was intentional release, but I don't think that we can dismiss the possibility that it was intentional release. I mean, the anthrax attacks, the FBI story for the anthrax attacks is that it was intentional release because the scientist was seeking more funding for such work.
Do you think that was true?
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm highly skeptical, I should say, of
Yeah.
that at least that it was just Bruce Ivans. And Graham McQueen, who recently died, has a book, The Case for Domestic Conspiracy, and I sort of covered some of that ground earlier,
Yep.
indicating that. But there are a whole series of other plausible, things that I hope to continue writing about regarding the origins of COVID. So I really and one person, Whitney Webb, at Unlimited Hangout, has she hasn't addressed this directly, but she's obviously given some indications, looking at folks like Robert Cadlick and others, for a case of possible intentional release for broader geopolitical or other goals. I don't think that can be dismissed.
Can I ask you a quick question? Can we
Sure.
take one question from Scarlett, and then
Sure.
what I want to do is I want to loop back to like a really critical thing you said a moment ago, but like which I think is this whole, like, your take on what you see developing with the Republicans and Democrats, and how you're very concerned that that's just not where we need to be headed with this investigation. So, but first I want to just take, because Scarlett, I think, might have a question back to Ebola. I don't know. Let me see if Scarlett, are you able to ask your question? I'm just going to take one question now because Scarlett was sitting there for a while. Scarlett, can you speak?
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Scarlett.
Sorry about that. I was speaking with myself muted. Hello, everyone. So I have a quick question. Why is it that nobody is so far? I don't know how the legal system works in the U.S. Like a public agency has filed a suit against NIH or whichever agency that provided funding, ask them for accountability and bring them to book. I mean, is such a thing even possible in the United States? I'm just asking because this is not this is not an issue of colluding with Russia. This is something far, far bigger. More than 1 million people have died in the US. More than 15 to 20 million people have died around the world, and trillions of dollars of businesses been completely destroyed. So, if there's something that needs to be held accountable, people should be held accountable for. This is a crime. People need to know what happened. So, is anything legal being pursued in the United States? Thank you.
I don't know details, but I know that some people are trying to figure out legal avenues. David Kimbrell of the Center for Food Safety, I know, has started to file some work, particularly targeting the NIH. Francis Boyle, I think, has constructed a theory whereby local district attorneys could potentially take some kind of legal action. And I know that there are other things in the works. I don't know, Bryce or Dana, if you have things to add on that.
I don't know.
I hope to write about stuff like this.
Yeah, I thought you wrote an article about like local DAs. You had something about local.
I mentioned it as one point in one of my critical points on COVID articles. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea. Yeah, I think this is the problem. The concept of accountability, and I think, was it Dana, you and I were talking about this before, I believe, about just who's ever been held accountable for any of this stuff.
Well, that's what keeps me up at night, is that nobody has been held accountable for any of these crimes.
I guess I can't say that. I mean, there have been people who have lost their jobs and put in jail for, I guess those might have been like chemical accidents. And of course, I was reading about the last person to die of smallpox was a photographer who got poisoned in a lab, and the person whose lab was responsible killed himself because he felt so terrible about it. So I don't know if it's always the case that there aren't accountability, but it is the scope of this seems absurd. And this actually goes to your point before, Sam, about you go back to what you were talking about with the Democrats and the Republicans and how you see this unfolding now. And you did mention Cadlick. I didn't mean to necessarily cut you off with Cadlick, although you were accusing, you might have insinuated Cadlick started the pandemic. I don't know. Who is that insinuated that? That wasn't you. That was somebody else, right?
No, I was quoting Whitney Webb,
Oh,
who
okay.
wrote a lengthy piece called that was entitled "Robert Cadlick, the Head of the Hydra," where
Oh, yeah. Well,
where he had a significant role regarding the anthrax attacks, and then coming out of the anthrax attacks, he set up a position at um, uh, Health and Human Services, and then he inhabited that position when COVID broke, and sort of shepherded much of the actual policy, despite the Trump theatrics around COVID. So I think that was an important work, and that I think people should take a look at.
Well, he also now, I guess if it's worth spending a little bit of a second on Cadlick. He's come up before because back to in the case of so what was he doing around the time of the anthrax attacks? What was his position then?
He had some kind of special advisory role, and I don't think it was him. I think it was one of his associates who was telling people to take Cipro before the attacks actually happened.
I see. Okay, well,
but the fact that somebody was doing that in those circles and that Cadlick was involved heavily with the policy building up to the anthrax attacks, I think it deserves a lot more scrutiny than it's gotten from just a handful of people.
I guess I hadn't heard of this. I'm not sure. What's the basis of the claim that he was telling people to take Cipro before the attacks?
It wasn't him. I think it was one of his associates.
Where's that? Who said that happened? I'm just curious. Like,
I think that's in Whitney Webb's reporting, but I'll look that up and get that to you. It's something that I probably should have readily available, or it might be in Graham McQueen's work as well. As I say, he wrote a book on the subject.
It's a shocking claim, obviously. But Cadlick also, he started a farm, or he was a stakeholder in a pharmaceutical company, or is like Emergent Biosolutions or something.
That's correct, and they've been involved currently as well. And I know Meryl Nass has done significant work on this as well. I'm almost, I'm not an expert on this, but I know that it's a point of extreme concern among Meryl Nass and Whitney Webb, and I think that they have some basis for that.
And they were given a contract to produce some of, was it the vaccines or something? Or
during COVID. And before, I think that they were involved with an anthrax vaccine as well.
Right. Or was it smallpox? No, anthrax or smallpox or something. There was a lot of conflicts of interest in terms of that. That I think was the concern. But now, fast forward to a few months ago. Now, this is what's shocking, of course, is that Cadlick is the primary author of the Muddy Waters report, or the recent thing that came out, the 200-page report on the COVID origins. That was I forget the name of the committee that produced it, but the fact that it was Cadlick that was responsible for that report. I guess, do you want to now discuss like how you see Cadlick's role versus, because a lot of what he's saying in there kind of contradicts stuff that Fauci was saying. So why would Cadlick be going against Fauci, and why are Republicans doing one thing and why are Democrats doing another thing? How do you see, like, you had framed it nicely. I just let you, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think part of what's going on here is that the U.S. establishment has two goals. It wants to continue doing dangerous lab work, and it wants to demonize or target at least China. So I think that in a sense, Fauci and Cadlick personify both of those strains. Fauci, says, we need to do this lab work. He's been a long time proponent of the creation of potential pandemic pathogens. And Cadillac is now taking on the role um, of saying it did come out of a lab and fingering China. This dovetail has manifested itself in a unanimous vote in the Senate recently, with legislation put forward by Senator Josh Hawley. When Hawley did media interviews on this, he would claim that it's that his legislation would tell the Director of National Intelligence to declassify all information pertaining to COVID origins. But that's not what the legislation says. The legislation says declassify all information relating to COVID origins and the Wuhan Institute of Virology. So anything relating to COVID origins and not pertaining to the Wuhan Institute of Virology is exempt from this legislation that has been falsely sold to the American public. Why would they do that? Why not just have a blanket declassify all the information? That, again, is another indication that we are not moving towards the actual story, that we're just, that now it's acceptable to say it might have come out of a lab, but it's got to be that it came out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Now, I don't know that. Maybe it did come out of the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Maybe it was a complete accident, and they've just gone to these extreme lengths to cover up an accident. But maybe there's something worse here. And you would think that a reasonable inquiry would just simply say declassify everything and let's really look at this. But that's not what's happening.
Sam, do you also sometimes wonder whether multiple things happened at different times, maybe?
Well, I mean, I've certainly wondered that pertaining to the variants, but I don't think that's what you mean.
Yeah. No, that is
what you mean.
That's one of my concerns, right, or one of the things I've wondered about and talked to Bryce about. And
right. I mean, another parallel with the whole war on terror thing is that during the war on terror, the Bush administration could issue a threat alert whenever it wanted to and determine the news cycle. We've now set up a mechanism whereby if there's an outbreak or a variant or something, it will dominate the news cycle. That's a horrible incentive to have. There are all kinds of benefits to parts of the establishment that might come out of that shouldn't be there.
Peter Daszak also said something in a talk that I've seen a couple times where he said, creating fear is, I'm paraphrasing, but a really important aspect of getting people to be motivated to do certain things. And it was around this topic.
He actually, I don't know if this is the quote you're thinking of, but he actually positively quoted Donald Rumsfeld. That was in my piece on him. Here, let me look this up. He positively cited Rumsfeld. There are no knowns. There are things we don't know. All that. And he says, his prescient speech. Just. I'm not sure if that's what you're referring to, but
I think it was some other. I've seen that quote before too, Dana. I forget. It's played frequently. It's quite a. I'm not the biggest fan of Daszak, but I do understand. Like he's a salesperson, right? So he's pitching this however he can, and that's one of many things he said. It sounds quite shocking, but it's sort of fits in with the general idea of spinning fear to the public before the pandemic happened to try to get money. So but that also was
but it's still scandalous. Like to somebody like me, right, who's an outsider hearing that this is how you get money as a scientist is insane. I mean, think about it. Like that's crazy.
You have to. Well, no, I mean it's kind of set up that way in a sense. Like you're supposed to, what your work needs to have a benefit for, human health, right? And depending upon what funding you're getting, or what institute of the NIH you're funded from, or in like other part of the government, they have particular, areas that they need to fund, and yeah, so there is. I do think it makes sense though, for if you want to fund researchers, you want them to do something that will benefit future society, protect us against any diseases that
Well,
emerge. It does
yeah,
make sense.
nobody would argue that. I'm not arguing that. I'm arguing that the psychology behind it is, to hearing it from my point of view, was pretty rattling, I would say.
Right. Well, and Barrick, I think they all, the talks that I've seen where they all start with a whole litany of these horrific, mass casualty events involving pathogens, is they're all designed to get you to back the research that they're going to now pitch to you. And I
Right.
do agree that is, we need, that's not going to change, of course, but I see there's a big problem in that approach to how we make funding decisions about science. But you still see it going on. I mean, every single press release you see from EcoHealth Alliance, all of these, op-eds or whatever written by the virologists arguing that if there's an urgent need to dump more money into virology because we're all going to die if we don't. It's I don't see how that ends without a fundamental restructuring of grant mechanisms and sort of the logic. It actually goes to the point we were saying earlier about Boyle. Francis Boyle's comments about, stopping a bunch of different type of research and then putting safeguards on things that are really actually kind of mostly safe right now, because the whole culture of science and the whole culture of the interactions between governments and scientists is getting extremely concerning at this point. I think anyway, I did. Let's see. It's okay. You want to take some questions if we have some, Sam? I know we said we're going to go for about an hour and a half, so I don't want to. If people have questions, go ahead and raise your hands now. We'll keep talking, and then if questions emerge, we'll take them. I did want to ask you though about going back to EcoHealth Alliance, Sam. In terms of so what is your reaction to the fact that our government, well, that NIH particular, still funds EcoHealth Alliance, and also gave them the grant that the Trump administration had stopped because of its linked to the Wuhan Institute of Virology? What's your thought about that, just generally? Oh, did I?
I think you've totally offended Sam.
Did I lose Sam? Uh-oh. I'm trying to think. You might have. This is the. You know what? This is the thrill of the Twitter Spaces. Now I'm gonna. How about?
He's there. He's there.
Wait.
I see him, but I don't.
I know, but maybe he disconnected.
There we go. There we go.
Okay. Okay.
I don't know why my thing refused to turn the mic off.
Huh.
I hope you don't
Okay.
mind. I'm not going to turn my mic off anymore when I'm not talking. I think that speaks to the fact that there are larger forces at play that would so continue to insist that EcoHealth Alliance, in spite of their reputation at this point among people who know much of anything about this, are they're continuing to get NIH funding. I should say that when I did my piece on them, the NIH funding was a minor part of it. They got far more money from the Pentagon, which they obscure, and they get even more money from USAID, which is looked at by many as a sort of soft power, CIA kind of thing. It's out of the State Department. It does things like try to, fund, technology and movements and regimes that the U.S. government is targeting, and so on. So, their broader funding patterns are also incredibly noteworthy. They also got a support from 77 Nobel Prize winners defending them when Trump attempted to cut off their funding or claimed that he was attempting to cut off their funding. So again, that again indicates to me that there are, that there are very powerful forces that want that to continue.
That was very depressing, actually. I was going to say, do you want to mention real quickly before I'll put Gregor on in a second, going to this point about the USAID funding to EcoHealth Alliance, you had an exchange in February with State Department spokesperson Ned Price.
Yes.
Do you want to comment on that? I found that very interesting. Do you want to mention that real quickly?
Briefly, I attempted to ask them about why they were continuing, why they were funding such work, and would they disclose information about it. U.S. Right to Know had, issued a FOIA and started legal proceedings by this point, and I think it was 3 years that they hadn't responded to this FOIA. And they just continued. They just completely stonewalled. He said, "No, we're not involved in that. We're involved in biosafety issues," which is a ridiculous statement, and just completely, refused to engage the issue in any level of substance.
It's astonishing. And I think, to your point about the NIH funding being a small piece, that's what I don't get. Why do they even need to have that? Why not just not even involve NIH at all? Because it goes against NIH's mission, at least, my view of it, to fund an organization like that. Whereas, put them under the CIA. Just make it obvious that that's what's going on. Because
then people would perceive this as biowarfare.
Well, we already do. Who does?
We don't.
I do.
I know. You and I might, but I mean, the whole thrust of what we've seen the last 3 years has been to obscure the reality and possibilities involved here from the U.S. public. And so I think that a lot of this is designed around that, so that the U.S. public didn't know at the critical time that it could have come out of a lab, and they don't know at the critical time that it's effectively much of this work could effectively be biowarfare. The imperative is to hide that from the U.S. public and to not make that an issue, and to keep the Democrats and Republicans doing their job, bickering over relatively marginal issues or in marginal ways, so that the establishment preserves its position. That's my view of how politics works.
I do want to come back. Actually, I want to come back to that in a second, but I want Gregor to ask a question. But then I'm going to come back to this point about the people being, tricked. Gregor, go ahead.
Hi there. Thanks for giving me the mic. I hope the volume is okay now. Not too loud.
Yeah, it's good. Thanks.
Okay, good. Hi, nice to meet you. Nice to meet you, Sam. It's good to have you on. It's
absolutely,
great
Gregor. Thank you.
Also, by the way, I linked your article about Whitney Webb and Robert Cadlack. It's somewhere in the chat, and I also linked your own work with Jonathan Latham. So, anyone interested in that, please take a look at it. Especially the article about Ebola by Sam and Jonathan Latham is very worthwhile, in my opinion. Some of you stated something about the nature of science and what science does. I actually want to contest it a little bit with a quote. I did research recently into human experiments happening in the United States. For instance, there were the Holmesburg prison experiments, some other experiments, also the Willowbrook experiments on children. And there is, in the context of a different prison experiment, I found a very interesting quote in a book called Acres of Skin, which is also mainly about the Holmesburg prison experiments, which were also conducted with dioxin, which was what gave the people in Vietnam poisoning.
Hold on, Gregor, what year are you talking about here? Can you give a little bit more background of these? This is not something.
The book came out in 1999, and the Holmesburg prison experiments were conducted under an Albert M. Kliegman from the 1950s to the 1970s.
Okay, thank you. So
And
okay.
in the book, Acres of Skin, I found a very interesting quote. I'm going to read it to you. It's about the nature of science. Quote, indeed, some members of America's university and scientific community were vocally and publicly offended by the cavalier behavior of doctors toward prison inmates, that is, the experiments. But a writer in 1907 responded to criticism with the following, quote, the most curious misconception is that the aim of science is for the cure of disease, the saving of human life. Quite on the contrary, the aim of science is the advancement of human knowledge at any sacrifice of human life. And when you look at what Peter Daszak did and other players, that's a pretty accurate description, I would say.
Oh,
Any?
Gregor, let me point out. I think you were responding to something I said about NIH. I believe. I'm saying that the mission of the NIH is for public health purposes, which is distinct from what scientists in general would do. So I'm just saying that an NIH-funded scientist is supposed to be, doing stuff that would eventually help public health. But
You and Dana said something about the nature of science, that of course it's about curing disease or something like that, and I
thought I was
actually...
saying that with respect to in the context of NIH funding.
Possible, yeah.
Yeah, but
Any
yeah,
event,
I
I
agree
think,
with you though. It really is a knowledge generating profession. I
yeah,
agree with that completely. It's to find out how the world works. And in fact, part of the NIH, this part of the NIH that I get funding from, it actually has that mission. It's a basic science funding mechanism. It's called general medicine. And it does fund really basic research that won't lead to a pandemic that'll kill everybody. So there is an important role for that type of research. The problem, of course, is glomming that in with the research that you're talking about, which is scary as heck, and is done by people that seem to have disregard for any other people on the planet. Like the consequences be damned. They're going to do what they want to do, and they don't want to have any checks and balances by any independent observers. But yeah, I'm completely in agreement with you that fundamentally science is a discovery enterprise, one that isn't necessarily worried about these issues, about how my behavior is impacting others on the planet, and that I think is a problem.
yeah.
One of the pieces I'm working on gets into the Einstein Bertrand Russell letter that was primarily directed at nuclear scientists, but basically alerting them to how they were being used by the economic and political establishments to further certain ends. And Bertrand Russell, who I have some mixed feelings about, at the end of his life sort of became almost an enlightened Luddite, basically saying, being very skeptical of technological advancement because he feared that it would just simply further empower people who are already in power, rather than be a logical advance of science and or for the benefit of humanity in general. So I think that these are serious questions, and unfortunately, I don't, with regards to the current U.S. political establishment, I don't think that there's an ethical limit on what what is capable. I don't think that we can say, oh, that can't be the case because they couldn't possibly do something that insidious. I don't think that's a legitimate argument, unfortunately.
Especially when you look at the history, especially then, because then it would just be one more case of the same thing.
Yeah.
So Gregor, I'm going to leave you up as a speaker, but I'm going to go to Nathan now. Nathan, you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question?
All right. Yeah, sure thing. Yeah, thanks for having this. Definitely been on my mind recently. And for me, I maybe have 5 short comments and then a couple of questions. So to me, I definitely think this was a bioweapon. I mean, PLA talks about weaponizing coronaviruses in 2015. China has invested a ton in asymmetrical warfare, cyber, outer space, carrier killer missiles. So that's fits with that doctrine. obviously a low value of human rights, right, with the Igor population, and then and a poor safety record, right, with like the space booster, rather than a controlled descent, it just like descended from outer space uncontrolled. And then, and of course, too, like with the cover up, right? Like if somebody's innocent, you try to get to the truth as fast as
Wait, I'm
possible.
sorry. What's the space thing you're talking about? What was that? I'm confused. What was you talking about? A space something descended from space? Space booster?
Well, yeah. So this was last year, part of their space program. So they launched like a satellite to orbit, and then traditionally, like the booster is dropped fairly shortly after ascent, right, in the ocean, so that nobody gets harmed. But then China actually brought the whole booster up to outer space and then dropped the booster from outer space so that it would basically land anywhere, right? Like, it could land on your house. So
Oh, you don't think that was kind of incompetence or just like poor engineering or something? Like you think that was actually, or you just think they don't care? I mean, I was wondering the connect. You're just saying that there's an indifference to human life, is what you're saying, right? Is
correct,
that
yeah,
the
correct, yeah,
idea?
like yeah, asymmetric warfare,
Though
indifference.
they did have the most stringent policies to protect their population, right? The lockdowns and stuff. They were very protective of their population until recently, correct? Or
Well,
maybe I'm
true, and
misunderstanding.
then possibly to Sam's point earlier, like if it was intentionally released, they might have known that, hey, we have like the state controlled society, so we could like weather this, right? So that's, I don't know if it was intentionally or not, but that could play a part in it. And then, but then, yeah, then my last point too is like the cover up, where it's like if you're innocent, you're like, hey, we're researching this to save the world. Come check everything out. But then if you're guilty in anything, right, you're trying to cover it up. Like, ooh, like don't look here, let's hide this. Arrest that person that was doing the vaccine, right, for COVID, the Chinese person. So I guess all that to say, to me, it seems like the Chinese are very guilty. This was a bioweapon. So I guess I'm just kind of curious to hear your thoughts too. Like, was this a bioweapon? And then also, like, why aren't they being held accountable, right? I mean, like,
Can I make a
So,
point before Sam answers this? I just want to clarify. You're saying you're actually saying it was a deliberately engineered organism that was made, or virus made for the purpose of using as a bioweapon, as opposed to doing research to figure out how different types of chimeric viruses work. Those are two different things. Like it gets into the intent of it. And I know if you make a virus that infects humans better than the natural one, that's by definition a bioweapon. But you're claiming the intention was to make a bioweapon, not to do research. That's what I understand you're saying.
right, and that's kind of my question as well. But yeah, but my maybe belief is like the intention was to create a bioweapon, even though this may have been one part of that, right? Like this is maybe like, oh, this is not the final version of the bioweapon, but we're gonna like fund this civilian research. We're gonna use U.S. funding and U.S. expertise to help us use the French to help build this biosafety lab for us. But then, hey, our end goal is to like invent a bioweapon and ultimately make China as strong as possible, right? With cyber, with outer space, with bioweapons, with nuclear, right? I mean, everything that they have.
I'll let Sam go ahead. You can answer this one.
sure. I mean, we do have to keep in mind that it's the U.S. has driven the undermining of the bioweapons convention. And I should say, sorry, parenthetical here, the WHO is, I haven't dug into this, but people who are following the WHO, rewriting the treaty and so on, are indicating that it's effectively attempting to override or take over the Bioweapons Convention. And Jamie Farrar, who I mentioned briefly, is now the chief scientist, and he was involved in both pillars of propaganda, both the Lancet letter and the Nature Medicine article. I think that should be a major concern right now, and another indication to me that we are not necessarily getting closer to the truth. If somebody like Jamie Farrar is becoming more and more powerful, that's not a good sign to me. But to your broader point about China, I think that we're entering into a world that's very dangerous in that it is taking on the worst attributes of the U.S. and the worst attributes of China. That is, COVID, was used, and other things have been used to surveil the power of big tech, the possibility of more authoritarianism. Those are all the worst aspects of Chinese society and the worst aspects of U.S. society, corporate power, commercialization, and so on. So I don't think that it's right to demonize China. Every society has something good and bad in it. And unfortunately, I think the dynamic that we're in is accelerating the worst aspects of each of the U.S. and China and decelerating their best aspects. I love the Tao Te Ching. I listen to it quite regularly. There's profound wisdom there. I think the U.S. society is incredible in terms of the sanctity of the individual. Those are both great things and they should be magnified. But we're not in that dynamic, and we need to get in that dynamic.
I would want to, Nathan, I'm sorry, let me just point something out. Going back to, you kind of circled around this, Sam, but you wrote an article recently it was in relation to RFK Jr., who I don't want to necessarily talk about, but the notion, and I guess I want to try to link this to kind of the point of Biosafety Now. I mean, we're very tiny or whatnot, but the fundamental issue here is, how do you actually change these? We can sit here and complain and complain and complain about all this nefarious stuff going on by people that have the levers of power. Well, those people could maybe have to change if enough people demanded that they change. If we could collectively demand that there was fundamental change in the structures of our society. You were making that point with RFK Jr. talking about that I believe, there needs to be people involved in holding, power, people that hold power accountable. And if they don't, then you get all of the crap that we're dealing with now. And I think that maybe I was accurately framing your point about that, or is it go beyond that?
What happened in that instant was RFK Jr. put out a tweet saying something like, we don't need to do retribution against Fauci or something like that. And right around that same time, there were a couple of activists who wore, JL Fauci T-shirts to a congressional hearing about COVID origins. So I think we do need to hold people accountable. And one thing that I've written a couple of pieces about Kennedy, and I'm working on another one. One of the things that surprised me about him is that he gets into these discussions about vaccines and how little he's done on biosafety. I mean, why isn't he making this more of a campaign issue? He's allegedly written a book about it, and to the extent that I have heard him say stuff, he's talked about, he's talked about it in a way that really pins the blame on China, which is kind of surprising considering that he wrote a book on Fauci.
I find that disturbing as well. I do find that concerning.
So I think that he can do a good deal more with his campaign. And, I've been a long time skeptic of the whole, Democratic Party process, and how the Sanders campaign ended up. And before that, the Kucinich campaign, and before that, the Jesse Jackson campaign. It's just what's called cheap dogging. They just bring people back into the Democratic Party fold. And I don't know if he's going to ironically end up being, another pathway to that. And what we need are independent movements, and who should be making demands of political figures and not pleading for their benevolence. So that's kind of where I'm coming from.
So Sam, it's incredibly difficult to get people to collectively do stuff at the level that's required. I mean, I guess the challenge is really hard when you have situations like, I'm, just personally encountering now where, I'll be in lockstep, 85% in lockstep with people on every political issue, whatever. But that 15% will cause us to, kind of just hate each other in a way. Or, I mean, I might exaggerate. That's a big problem.
Yeah, I think people should be open about their differences, but still be able to work together. I mean,
it's aspirational, but geez, it's really hard. It's really hard, and there's a lot of ego involved. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's Organic Consumers Association has been out there, and they've galvanized people to do stuff. I'm sure that Biosafety Now might not agree, 100% with Organic Consumers Association.
What did they do? What would we disagree? We don't.
I'm trying not to stress that. But they've done I think a lot of good work on pandemic origins, and I mean they had a petition going from early on in the pandemic against that I think Richard E. Bright signed, against the creation of potential pandemic pathogens. So, I view Kennedy's run as something of an opportunity, but I'm also concerned about it. I mean, what I see the establishment does is it instrumentalizes virtually everything. I just had a piece today about how it instrumentalizes the International Criminal Court. And I think that movements that are trying to do something good need to basically instrumentalize things. They need to use politicians. They need to not fall in love with politicians. They need to say, okay, this guy can do this for us, and get that done as much as possible.
Yeah, in fact, that's in a way that kind of describes what Richard has done, because he'll talk to anybody.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's I think that's prudent. I once asked Richard for an interview, and he didn't give it to me.
He doesn't do a lot of that stuff.
No, but he always gets back to me, so that's good.
Yeah, email. He likes email. Scarlett, you had another question?
Yeah. So earlier, I think Mr. Sam mentioned the name of Francis Boyle as one of the persons who is putting in some efforts to take this to make this into a legal case. He mentioned one more name. I couldn't quite grasp the other name.
David Kimbrell with the Center for Food Safety.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
Of course. There are others.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think these.
Yeah. I'll try to be writing about this, but I'm aware that there are other lawsuits on the horizon.
Apologies, Scarlett. I accidentally removed you while you were. You can pop back up if you want. I can't find. If you want to get back on the panel, I'll add you. I will say, I guess we can wrap up in a little bit. I was going to say, with your point, there you are, Scarlett. This idea of petitioning, that is something that we are going to start getting into, to try to put pressure on, politicians to change. We haven't done that yet, but we are intending to start trying to launch petition drives and get people to engage with those. But the concern, of course, is how do we mobilize people that are on Twitter, raging against all the, the establishment, to do something outside of, the keyboard, I guess. I don't know. I'm not sure, if how we can effectively mobilize large people movements. We're trying to figure that out, I guess. And the hope is that Biosafety Now will become like a force where we will have lots of people that are joined together on these issues that we draw from a diverse set of, political beliefs, basically, I guess is the way to put it. Because ultimately many of us are, more left-leaning, but much of our fellow left-leaning folk do not like what we're doing often, which is an interesting space to be in.
Right. I should just a couple of quick things. First off, I misspoke. David Kimbrell is a different fellow. What I should say was Andrew Kimbrell with the Center for Food Safety for the previous caller. In all honesty, Bryce, that was part of my motivation for doing the Ebola piece. I mean, I thought it was true, but I also wanted to make the issue lab safety, and the creation of potential pandemic pathogens, and to get out of this China obsession. And I thought that telling the Ebola story would be a way for people who, were not interested in demonizing China to understand the problem. So that was part of my motivation. I think we need to still do traditional stuff like, I don't know, bumper stickers and yard signs. I mean, that can still happen.
I agree. Yeah, I actually am a big fan of that. We did start a gift shop but it was intent. The intent is to have physical objects in society that draw people's attention to these issues. But how we do that, I don't know, because there's a whole psychology to the types of things that draw, make movements and stuff. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Sam. Like, I know Dana was very against me with the mugs.
With the mugs? Okay.
No,
well, I mean, I let her rebut. We need to hear each other out.
Bryce, if Sam says it, I'll do it, just because I like to.
Actually,
poor Bryce.
I'll try to be worthy.
I love Bryce, and I just torture him all day because we disagree on so many things. But anyway, I adore him, and he puts up with all of my ideas and theories and concerns and rage about what's happening. And he does it with good light heart about it most of the time, except when he screams at me, Dana.
Okay, it's only typing in all caps with 3 exclamation points.
I know I know I've crossed the line.
Are you channeling Milton?
I get the Dana. Oh yeah. Oh my God. Yeah.
Scarlett, you had a question.
Yeah. So thank you. So the name is Andrew Kimbrell, right? Center for Food.
Yes, I apologize for the mistake earlier.
No problem. Thank you very much. So I just have one more thought. So in a country like the United States, for anything and everything, people will go on a protest march for anything and everything under the sun. But for something as big and serious as this, why is it that they find the public awareness or consciousness awareness amongst the public so lukewarm, and the response so lukewarm? I mean, they should be on the streets demanding justice.
Because movements in the United States have turned over their brains to big media. And I first noticed this with the Arab uprisings when they occurred in 2011. And you basically had Arab uprisings. You had the Arab world was dominated by Gulf media, Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya, and Al Jazeera and Al Arabiya hyped protests in Syria and Libya and Egypt initially, and of course Tunisia initially, and not in the monarchies. And that made me sensitive to how movements were basically playthings of media. And so people will get out there and do Black Lives Matter because CNN and MSNBC glorify that brand of activism. And Fox will glorify whatever they want to glorify. And because we've become so dominant by these partisan sectarian media that has perverted and molded media movements so that they are not asserting themselves in a meaningful way, and they effectively become appendages of either the Democratic or Republican establishments, which ultimately collude to do a lot of bad things. So I think key to this is formation of independent media, which is why I do the kind of work that I do.
And I think that one of the reasons I love the Twitter Spaces is exactly that, because it's sort of a democratized media, or I not to channel whatever Elon Musk was saying, but these really are places or situations where our organization and Sam, can come on and make appeals to the public directly and say, we want to do this. We want you to trust that we have your best interest in mind, but we need your help. And you can't do that, if you don't have the levers of power in the media. Obviously, it's difficult, but it takes time. It takes time to establish trust. It really does. So,
Right,
I'm
and
not sure.
and
Yeah.
it's a shifting media terrain, and Elon Musk can change the rules about Twitter Spaces when he wants to. I mean, I've been shadow banned. Elon Musk has been kind of honest in that he said, "I believe in freedom of speech and not freedom of reach," meaning he can set up a world where if he doesn't like what somebody says, he can put them in a glass booth and nobody
Right.
will hear what they say, although
Yeah.
they quote unquote have freedom of speech. So we should not be in this world where big tech, often colluding with government, is perverting the First Amendment. We need to be building alternative independent structures, and that requires work and that requires funding. So
From
people
billionaire.
no, from ordinary people.
Good
I mean,
luck. Yeah.
and this is part of my critique of presidential campaigns. So many people put so much money into Bernie Sanders, and so many people are going to put so much money into Kennedy. But where will it go? We need to have independent structures and not these waves of campaigns that let people feel heard for a little while but don't affect policy.
But that goes to and I agree with that point. I do think that's that's again going back to the goal, like, of what doing an activist organization like we're trying to do here.
Right.
We have to just sort of do, one person at a time. Like with this petition thing, like just talking about a petition. So what we're going to do soon is launch a petition. Now, when we launch a petition, people can go online and sign it. But in order for that petition to be successful, we're going to need to make appeals to everybody, come on a Twitter space and make an appeal directly and say, look, we want you to sign, but we want you to get other people to sign. And here's why. We can't just, you have to kind of put the work in and try to win. If you have an issue, you have to convince people that you are on the right side of that issue. I don't know. Sam, you're not an activist though, right? You don't consider yourself an activist?
I mean, not really. I mean, I know, I covered the Plowshares trial where these Catholic worker activists broke into a U.S. nuclear base and, with sledgehammers and spilling their own blood. So I know what
Wait,
serious activism looks like.
are you
And
saying we need to be doing that? Does Biosafety Now have to be using sledgehammers to break into places and spilling blood? Dana, will you form a
wow,
committee
I have
to?
not thought of that, but wow.
Can I outsource that to Dana and whoever
What
else you want to get to do this?
what am I doing now?
Apparently, sledgehammers and bloodshed is what we're. I don't know. I've never heard of that. Sam, what is that story? That's a crazy story. What happened?
Well, it started with the Berrigan brothers, who were priests who were very prominent in their opposition to the Vietnam War, and eventually in the 1980s, I guess, they started breaking into U.S. military facilities and destroying, or at least symbolically destroying, the weapons there. And it's called the Plowshares Movement. It grew out of, in part, the Catholic Worker Movement founded by Dorothy Day. And in 2018, on the anniversary of the assassination, I don't know if it was the assassination or the birth of Martin Luther King, they broke into the largest Trident base in Georgia, Kings Bay. And with sledgehammer, there's like a shrine to nuclear weapons in the middle of this base, and they, spilled their blood and did all kinds of things to symbolically destroy the nuclear weapons there. And I covered their trial. And it was remarkable. I mean, and this was like a year before COVID, and it really showed me how something could be hidden in plain sight. You had government military officials on a stand in a court of law asked about nuclear weapons, and they would neither confirm nor deny that the nuclear weapons were at this nuclear weapons facility, right? So it trumped the basic concepts of jurisprudence. You're not allowed to do this, I can neither confirm nor deny baloney, like at a State Department briefing. You can't do that when you're in a witness stand, you would think, but they did.
Yeah.
They did. So, it just highlighted to me how you can hide things in plain sight. So these are really committed activists, and with a functioning peace movement, you would have people protesting in front of these labs around the country that are doing this dangerous lab work. That I hadn't really thought of it until you said it, Bryce. But you're right. That would be the next step here, or one of the next steps here. And it doesn't necessarily mean breaking in and spilling blood, but at least have a couple of people with a sign outside of these facilities.
But it's
that's
not
probably a
the
worthwhile
facilities. It's the NIH. It's the choice to fund the research.
And you have protests. You have people like Alexis Bader Mayer and this COVID Origins group that's in DC. They've been having protests in front of the NIH quite regularly over the last several years. So there is some of that.
Guys, I'm so sorry, but I have to run. My phone is about to die, so I just want to quickly say goodbye to Sam.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I know we ran long here.
No, that's okay. I look forward to reconnecting with you privately again soon. And Bryce, I will talk to you later tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Bryce.
Okay. No, thanks. We will. Sam, do you have any other final things?
No, not at all. I think we covered a lot.
Oh, okay. Hold on. Two things, just like housekeeping issues here. I hope they're quick housekeeping things. The clip of the European Parliament conference thing. We were both in agreement that one is to be. What do we want to call that? The guy with the bow tie at the Parliament talking about all kinds of. Was it
David
Martin? David Martin. I thought that was to be ignored.
Yeah.
Just like it's not useful.
I didn't listen to the whole thing.
Okay, but
I didn't listen to the whole thing.
Now, and then the other thing that popped up on Twitter, somebody asked about this. The guy who makes a very scary case about like nanoparticles or whatever. You said you spoke with him. Kyle is his name. Is that his name, Kyle?
Kyle is a really cool activist volunteer who did a video clip of that for me. So I'm hoping to look at that and possibly write an article about it.
I thought that was just a guy scaring everyone with speculation about what you could do. It just didn't seem to me to be like, obviously, he was laying out a bunch of. Okay, anyway, that was a housekeeping thing at the end here. I just wanted to
he's a military guy saying that they have their eye on doing that kind of thing. So I think it's fair scrutiny.
Well, sure, but I think I mean there's all kinds of crazy.
It could be complete empty hype. Yeah.
I think it is in a sense but he's very good at pitching it. Scarlett, you had a quick question before we wrap it up?
Oh yeah, you mentioned someone who is now tenure position in Stanford. I forgot that name. What was that name?
Mark Lipsitch is tenured at Harvard, and he had been warning about the dangers of potential pandemic pathogens, and he has a co-author who's at Yale. And I contacted him at the beginning of the pandemic, and he wouldn't say a word. And I actually heard a news conference several months into the pandemic where he refused to make comment. I think that he contributed to the recent Philip Zelikow book. Philip Zelikow was head of the 9/11 Commission and covered up a lot of stuff, and now he was head of a commission out of the University of Virginia. That seemed rather skewed and got funded by Google and other big tech, which have ties to some of this as well. So I don't. It's really notable to me how people like Mark Lipsitch were silent at a critical time. I mean, we are doing what we can now, but what should have happened, we need to be very clear, is that in early 2020. people like Mark Lipsitch, people like Allison Young, a lot of people who knew damn well that this could have come out of a lab should have said so, and they should have said so clearly. And we wouldn't be in this jam if they had done that.
I guess I would say it might be speculative. Well, okay, I understand the anger. I guess it's hard to pinpoint those particular. I get it. It's just that they, for many years they were doing this, and then
and then when it mattered, they didn't.
Well, okay, but that's a different question, I guess, in terms of, but you never have spoken with Mark or Allison about what
I emailed them repeatedly in early 2020, virtually pleading with them to say something. I mean, look, my organization went off the rails because of this, right?
Yeah.
If they had spoken up, I would have been able to take my organization to a different space. And I'm sure.
It's unclear. But again, I mean, you do. The problem, of course, is that, say hypothetically they spoke up and then they were just branded as, conspiracists.
Then what's the point of them?
Well, no. I'm just saying, this is. Well, okay. What? All right. That's a whole.
I realize that sounds harsh, but the WikiLeaks slogan is "Courage is contagious." Well, so is cowardice.
Right. Well, okay.
And so when you got tenure at Harvard, what's it for if you're not able to speak out and warn the global public about a catastrophic event in real time?
I agree with you there. In fact, actually, this is one of the points I make, which is it's really easy for me as a tenured professor, to say whatever the hell I want, which is something that's nice. But it is also the case that it's not you're not winning a lot of friends by taking a position that contradicts the entire scientific establishment, right?
Right, and activists, and people of conscience around the world risk getting a bullet in the head for telling the truth. No one's asking Mark Lipsitch to take a bullet to the head, unless he thinks.
This took a bad turn.
Unless he thinks that if he speaks out, he's going to get a bullet to the head. Now, I don't know.
No, but I mean, but I guess he is. But I honestly, I don't want to try to guess why he's making various decisions. But I do think he's still beating the drum against gain of function, right? I mean, he did.
I understand, and that's good. But a stitch in time saves 9 billion.
But I
hope that he does everything that he can possibly do that's good from now on in. I really wish that he'd spoken up when it could have done more.
I do also think, though, that if you use that approach with people, they get more entrenched in not doing what you want them to do. That's what I've found. So,
well, I mean, different. I can be Malcolm X and you can be Martin Luther King here. Okay.
That's funny, actually. Paul Thacker was making that analogy about.
Oh, was he?
Well, no, because I was saying that, behavior-wise on Twitter, you can transition between an extreme position and then a more reasonable position, and he was saying the same thing, you should do do more Malcolm X for not as much Martin Luther King. Of course, I said please don't associate me with great civil rights.
Right.
But again, Scarlett, you got another question? You want another name?
Yeah. So
name?
not the name. I was actually looking at the investigative report that he mentioned. I do see that Mark Lipsitch's name is there, as well as David Relman. Correct me if I'm wrong. Both Relman and Lipsitch they were co-authors in that paper that came immediately after Nicholas Waits' article in 2021, right? Calling for an investigation into the COVID origins, which came out in the Science magazine. Correct me if I'm wrong.
That sounds right.
Yeah. So
Relman, I think, said some stuff in 2020. I think that Lipsitch started saying stuff in 2021.
Yes. So I think the problem that the way I see it, right? I think all these people, they probably knew in private, the hush-hush, they knew that this was huge. This is definitely a big deal. It probably was most likely an accidental lab leak, but they wouldn't say it so openly. Instead, they were they were cushioning their words with a lot of diplomatic and technical jargon, while saying something. Yes, it happened. It may not have happened. Instead of being very explicit about it, I think that's a problem.
Look, again, I don't. I'm going to take the position that you don't know what people are going through. How about that? Who knows? Maybe there was, stuff going on in people's personal lives that made it difficult for them.
Yeah, but there were so many.
Okay.
There were so many. But yes.
All I know is that Sam's going to be attacking me when I don't do stuff later.
No,
I'm just kidding.
I might be critiquing. Look, we have to be able, if we're going to stand a chance at victory.
I agree.
Elves and dwarfs have to work together to stop Mordor.
Now, who's that? Now, who are you calling the? Anyway, okay. But yes, I appreciate
I'm
your
calling
point.
myself the worst thing that you can call somebody, okay? I'm calling myself a dwarf. Does that help?
No, that's fine. Nathan, you've got it. Okay, Nathan, final question here, and then we'll wrap up before we start besmirching other people that.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks, Bryce. But yeah, just kind of like a follow-up question. I mean, I agree with you guys. I think we need to kind of help go after some of this research that's going on where, the human population is not having a voice in this dangerous research. But I guess, just with the latest and I guess with China, is there going to be any accountability, right? I mean, obviously one end of the spectrum, there's intentional bioweapon. The other end of the spectrum, research with, incompetence, letting the lab leak it. So I guess, is there going to be any accountability, for what happened, on the part of China?
Well, again, what about accountability in the U.S.? I mean, I think we could, if we handle our own house. I don't know why we're casting stones at China. I mean, who knows? I guess this is the point. We may not ever get accountability for anybody. You may have to just accept that we made the world safer because people said, all right, fine, we'll stop doing gain of function research. Maybe we'll stop building BSL-4 labs and reduce what we do. But nobody will ever face accountability, and the history books will have people that have been perhaps behaving badly. History will say, oh, they were great people and champions for the people. I don't know. That's probably, I mean, in a sense, that is, I guess, no. Actually, Sam will say that's a horrible outcome, right? Because then we're just going to repeat it again, right? Because we're going to do the same thing we did with Iraq.
That would be my concern. But I'm willing to, I want to work with anybody who wants to stop the creation of deadly pathogens.
That's what we're going to do. We're going to launch. That's what our petition.
Yeah, but I think it's useful to have a space to talk out what we're up against here, and I'm arguing that we may be up against something bigger than what some people may think, and I think it's useful to try to be figuring out what we're up against here.
What are we up against other than the CIA, DOD? I'm assuming those are what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, again, that's why people should go to biosafetynow.org and donate what they can, because we've got to fight against a lot of multi-billion-dollar special interests. Anyway, thank you. Is that so, Sam? I'm going to leave it there. And we didn't get to this point about this history repeating itself. Maybe next time you join us, we can go over this, because it's never, this idea that we're just seeing Iraq, the build-up to the war in Iraq, repeat itself again here in the sort of media space. But I guess if that's so, I guess I'm going to just wrap it up then. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Come on again. I really enjoyed this, and
I did too.
Now again, Substack. What can you give the link?
Yeah, I guess. Please. Husseini.substack.com. That's where I'm writing right now, and I'm touching on. I'm dealing with other issues as well, but I'm really continuing to do stuff on pandemic origins related issues. I have some follow-up pieces coming up regarding the Ebola 2014 as well. So I hope people sign up for that.
And maybe sometime we'll have. I know that Maybe Jonathan Latham will pop in sometime, right? I don't know
Yeah,
if
I think it would be great if you had Jonathan on, and you might want to have Cherno on after. He's tied up right now with the elections in Sierra Leone, but Cherno Ba wrote a book about the outbreak and has a lot of
Is he on
interesting.
Twitter?
Sorry,
Is he on Twitter?
he is Africanist
Oh.
Press. I'll send you the I'll send you his tag.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah, that'd be very interesting. Okay.
Fascinating guy.
Well, great. All right. Well, thanks a lot, Sam, and thanks everybody that participated. And like I said, we're going to launch a petition soon, and there will be some information about that. And we will have the next space we have, I believe, will probably be a plea for people to sign that petition and tell all their friends and family to sign it as well, so that we can actually try to make some change. But anyway, have a good night, everybody, and until next time.